how do people combat the fact that we do eat so many sweets? They say, well, I'll just eat it in moderation. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. What does moderation look like? And I'm sure you see this all the time. And I know so many health practitioners, because they'll say, okay, they'll get a new client. They'll say, okay, do you eat healthy, or how would you describe how you eat? And they're like, oh no, I eat very healthy. Great. Okay. Can I see your food diary from the week? And it's like, think bar, this kind of shake and this and that, and these things that are very ultra processed that have all these kind of like questionable ingredients and things like that. Or they'll be having like, 3 coffees with all this sugar, and they're not counting it. So it's all perspective. It's this illusion of health, right? So that's going on, is we think we're better than we are, or we think we're worse than we are. So we go to either extreme.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show. I'm Dr. Ashley, and today I am so excited to welcome a very special guest on the show. We have a chef here, and his name is James Berry. He's got 16 plus years in the culinary field, and he started as a private chef cooking for celebrities like Tom Cruise, Mariska Hargitay, George Clooney, Gerard Butler, Sean Puffy Combs, Barbara Streisand, and John Cusack. Most recently, James launched his first functional food product called Pluck, which is an organ-based seasoning. And it's the first of its kind and an amazingly easy and delicious way for people to get organ meats in their diet. And I will attest to this. I use Pluck, and I really can't stand the taste of organ meats, but this seasoning is really delicious. James is also a published cookbook author, having co-authored the recipes in Margaret Floyd's book, Eat Naked, and co-authored the follow-up cookbook, The Naked Foods Cookbook. He most recently co-authored the recipes in Dr. Alejandro Junger's book, Clean 7. Chef James, I'm so grateful that you're here today. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I would love to dive in. I know you've described yourself as a picky eater, and then you've turned this amazing chef who's focused on nutrient-dense ancestral foods. Can you tell us a little bit about how you went from picky eater to loving food of all types?
Yeah, the truth is that it didn't happen until I was in my 30s. So I was picky for more than half of my life. So yeah, I hope that's not discouraging for any picky eaters out there. But I do think it really is about, you just have to make the decision to not be picky once you're of that age. And of the age I was in my 30s. And it was a mix of, I want to be healthy, I want to be more adventurous, and I'm done. Like, I'm sick and tired of being so picky and being scared of food. And I put myself in a situation, culinary school, which really opened the doors up to trying lots of food. And I basically was starting a process that had a beginning and an end. And I said, okay, I'm going to go into this process and I'm going to eat everything that's put in front of me. And just by committing to that, it opened me up. And I would say I'm still specific, but I'm definitely not as picky as I used to be. Okay. Isn't specific a nice word?
It is. I think you just put a nicer word on top of it.
I know, right?
So what would you eat when you were a picky eater? Like, what did your diet consist of?
Well, what's so funny is that, it's so popular now to not eat the bun and to basically just go animal, you're right? Like just to eat the beef. And that's what I was doing when I was a kid. Like, we would go on car trips, a lot of traveling in the car, and you would inevitably stop at like one of the fast food places because they weren't as demonic, or at least we weren't outwardly aware of how demonic they are, whatever. But it was more innocent then. And we would go to McDonald's and they would already have the food made, like with their special sauce, with the buns, with the pickles, all that stuff. And so we would have to ask for them to make it fresh and plain. And I just wanted the bun and the meat. And it was always this kind of like tug and pull of like, you just want the meat? Yeah. No sauce, nothing. Like, don't do anything. And then they would finally serve it. And I would take it and I would slowly like pull the meat out of the bun and just eat the meat and then cover it up and throw it out. Like, so I was trying to be as regular as I could. I was trying to be normal. Yeah. But I was only eating the meat. And to this day, I don't like ketchups. I don't like a lot of condiments unless I've made the condiments and I've controlled the ingredients. But it's very much how I look at it now. The taste buds that we've all grown up learning about in school, salty, sweet, bitter, sour. Those 4 tastes. We definitely skew salty sweet in the US. And that is absolutely what my palate was back in the day. And so anything that was like different from what I knew, what I trusted, that palate focus was honestly, it was a little scary to me, you know? And I think looking back even, and I know picky eating, particularly nowadays, we talk about it a little bit more of like, it's, you know, sometimes kids are more spectrum, that so textures and flavors are really difficult for them to transition from. And I completely understand. I'm not poo-pooing that at all. But for me, picky eating was my way of controlling what I could, because my life felt a little chaotic emotionally.
I understand that. I think a lot of people with disordered eating, I mean, that's a big aspect of it, is that they can control what they're eating when they can't control any other aspect of their lives.
Hey there, need extra support staying hydrated while shedding pounds and maintaining weight loss? Introducing Dr. Ashley's Electrolyte Plus, which I created just for this purpose. Packed with evidence-backed ingredients like vitamin D, C, and zinc for immune support, B vitamins for energy, and a blend of full-spectrum electrolytes and minerals to hydrate, stabilize glucose levels, and curb cravings. Visit drashleywellness.com and use code ASHLEY10 for 10% off your first purchase or 20% off your first subscription order with free shipping. Plus, enjoy a 30-day money-back guarantee. Back to the show.
I have a lot of clients who come into PhD weight loss and they say they're picky eaters, and they're, 40, 50, 60 plus. And they say that they don't like veggies, or a lot of people don't like salad dressing on their veggies. And I like to add some good oils onto the veggies just to get us healthy fats, So would you explain what you mean by that you felt scared to try different foods? Because I'm sure a lot of our listeners feel the same way.
Yeah, you want to think about the emotional tie you have to that food that you have high emotions around. So it could be that food you love. I love to have a glass of wine, right? What's the emotion behind that? Like, where did that start? What's the tether to that? Or I hate Brussels sprouts or whatever, that like visceral kind of like emotional tug or pull of where you dislike or love something. And I think it's really interesting that we put those kind of emotions on food, because in many ways it's like, well, those are the emotions you should be putting towards human. Like, I love you. Oh, I just want to curl up and be close to you, right? It's like these very physical and tangible emotions we really should be tying to connections with people. But for whatever reason, our food, the emotions that are tied to food, if you really track it back to your childhood, it's usually connected to who made the food, how they made it, and what emotional state of the environment was when it was made. If you really look back and audit your childhood and look at, okay, what are these high emotional foods for me? Good or bad, right? What are they? Because sometimes the things, like, we don't want to just judge whether, because when we say picky, right, we think picky is like, well, it's just the foods we refuse to eat. It's like, well, no, but also it goes the other way where we're almost like addicted to certain foods. So it's an addiction towards not eating foods, but it can also be an addiction towards eating specific foods and not wavering from those. And both can be, have their own weight. And I really do like to focus on, when I work with a client as a chef, one of the first things I do is I say, so what textures of food do you gravitate towards when you're having a bad day? And that's a portal in. And a lot of times if it's a female, it's really interesting because there are some characteristics that are consistent based on, sex and gender or whatnot. Well, I don't know. I get confused about the sex and gender thing, so I'll just say gender. I get confused of which is which nowadays because I'm supposedly cis and I don't even know where that came from. I don't even know what that is. So whatever. But point being that a lot of women, they gravitate towards creamier textures. And
I
a
was
lot of
thinking when
men,
you said that, for me, I thought ice cream.
yeah, creamy cheese,
Yeah.
ice cream, mashed
Heavy
potatoes. Yeah, absolutely. And then men tend to, of course, this is not, absolute, but they tend to gravitate towards more crunchy, salty things. And so, you start asking, well, what's the texture? And then they start sharing with you, oh, I loved, like, I'm just going to make this up. I love fluffy mashed potatoes. Oh, really? Like, when did you get those? At what point? Oh, well, my father, he used to make those every holiday Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, he made them. And it was always so joyful because normally he was like really angry and dark. But when he made his mashed potatoes, oh, ding, ding, ding. Like, oh, so this was a time of connection with your father. And it was one of the times where he seemed really happy. You know what I mean? So we start to take these foods at these points, these very integral points of our lives. We lob on story to them. And sometimes there's trauma attached to them as well. Usually the things that we really don't like. Oh, yes, my mom would always force me to eat Brussels sprouts, and they were always like mushy and pale green. And I just remember the fights we would have, where she would let me leave the table until I ate them. And, so there's all this trauma tied to this Brussels sprout. So of course you're going to say, like, when someone serves Brussels sprouts, you're like, no, I don't eat those. And I'm like, okay. And so as a chef, a personal chef, I would identify these things, and then we would dig a little deeper, and then I'd say, okay, would you be willing if I made that Brussels sprout completely different than how you've described the Brussels sprout of the past? If I made it completely different, would you just be willing to try it? And usually they do, and they taste it and they're like, oh, wow, this is so good. And I'm like, yeah, because I didn't make it mushy. So I made it crispy like a chip. And then they had said it was pale green or kind of throw up green. And I was like, great. I made it bright green. And I, like I said, I made it, the texture of it completely different than what they associated as a child. And I do the same thing with organ meats for people because a lot of people have associated icky taste. I do the same thing with if someone's kind of dealing with addictive foods. Like I used to do a lot of elimination diets, but what I would do is we would eliminate lots of stuff, but I would make sure the foods that they were eating tapped in to the emotional kind of grounding that they needed that they were previously getting from the foods we removed. So for example, if someone was really addicted to like those mashed potatoes, that starchy kind of mashed potato, well, I would do the same thing. I would make it nice and fluffy, and I would make it with lots of fat, lots of butter or something like that. But it would be like celiac or like,
cauliflower,
some other root vegetable instead of potatoes. And they would eat it. I could do it with cauliflower, for example. And I used to do all those kind of tricks, those reciprocation tricks with it by swaps, I guess that you would call them. I did all these swap tricks, and it would work. And then people would be like, oh, I'm totally getting emotionally met, and my body feels lighter because I'm not getting weighed down by this, whatever the food was.
So our dietary choices and likes are really driven by emotions. Therefore, we can say that we could change the way we think and make a choice like you did and just say, okay, I'm going to be open and try these other foods. We can also create substitutes that will still fulfill us emotionally. And then I do think there's that metabolic point that when we stop feeding our bodies this hyper palatable, high salty, high sugary foods, then our palate does change. I mean, I see this in our clients all the time. They used to not like vegetables at all. And then, oh my gosh, after a few weeks even, they start to enjoy it. Or they come back to fruits thinking, oh my gosh, the fruit is so sweet, when before they couldn't really taste or appreciate the sweetness from a piece of fruit because they were consuming soda or whatever, cereals in the morning, and it just muted their taste buds. Do you think that's true?
Oh, that's so true. It's so legit. And that's what I used to do as well. And what's really important for people to know is that you can recalibrate or adjust the palate in 2 weeks. Like it doesn't take a long time, minimum 2 weeks.
How do you do that? Is it true like you feed it more whole foods, meats, veggies, less extreme taste?
It's determined by what your outcome is. But back in the day, I did what's called a sugar control detox. And what that was we pulled out all anything that had sugar, anything that was overly sweet. We pulled out all ultra processed foods. We pulled out all alcohol. We pulled out white potatoes. We pulled out pastas and grains. So basically, what people were eating were, we even pulled out dairy. So we pulled out the three main allergens: dairy, soy, and wheat. And what people ate was primarily animal protein, any animal protein. They had some healthy fats, so maybe coconut oils. They did not have cheeses or dairy fat. They could do ghee because ghee is clarified butter, meaning that the dairy fat is removed. We did animal fats as well, like lard, tallow, duck fat, but that's kind of it. And then they could do resistant starches. So they could do pretty much any vegetable, and then resistant starches like parsnips. They could do some sweet potatoes, but we tried to limit that. Anything that was overly sweet, they could do definitely like butternut squashes, most squashes, zucchinis, yellow crookneck squash, cellulac, like I mentioned, cauliflower, really Brussels sprouts, any abundance of those vegetables. And then if they were going to have anything sweet, what they could have is they could have a little stevia with something, but really what they could have is like berries. So they could have raspberries, blackberries, and blueberries. And that's it. Like, and in 2 weeks, men lost between 20, like I would say 19 and 23 pounds, maybe even 25 sometimes at the high. And women lost between 13 and 18 pounds, 19 pounds. Yeah. And people, to your point, they went to try to have a glass of wine. And before the detox, they were doing 3 glasses a night. They could barely finish one because they were like, it's too sweet. And I'm like, yeah. You know, and then they would try to have fruit, or they would try to have a dessert that's prepared, you know, with the sugar and everything. They'd be like, oh, it's too sweet. And I'm like, yeah, try that strawberry. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's so sweet. And they would have maybe a couple and they were done. Yeah. And so it really goes to show you, and this is, I think, what's also really important besides the fact that you can shift your palate within 2 weeks minimum. The other important thing is you cannot take yourself so seriously. You can't accept everything that you are, that it's forever.
Yeah,
or infinite,
I like that.
You know what I'm saying? Because we forget, to your point, we forget that the things that we're eating daily are affecting us emotionally, physically, and they're affecting our palate. They're affecting our taste buds. So they're affecting our choices.
That's right. There was a study looking at rats, and they fed the rats their usual rat food, and then they fed them cheesecake. And once they had the cheesecake, they couldn't stop. And I think there was also cocaine, and they went to the cheesecake over the cocaine. And then they would flash these yellow lights, which would signal harm coming to the rats. And when they were eating the cheesecake, they didn't even look up. So like it overrode their safety and life signals, you know? So really, if you guys are eating these types of foods, they can override our signals and make us feel like there's no hope, but really there is hope and we can change.
This is so human of us, but I bring it up because I think we have to own it. We have to own our humanness. And here's the thing. How do people combat the fact that we do eat so many sweets? They say, well, I'll just eat it in moderation. Okay. Yeah. What does moderation look like? And I'm sure you see this all the time. And I know so many health practitioners, because they'll say, okay, they'll get a new client. They'll say, okay, do you eat healthy, or how would you describe how you eat? And they're like, oh no, I eat very healthy. Great. Okay. Can I see your food diary from the week? And it's like, you know, Think Bar, this kind of shake and this and that, and these things that are very ultra processed that have all these kind of like questionable ingredients and things like that. Or they'll be having like, you know, 3 coffees with all this sugar, and they're not counting it. So it's all perspective, you know, it's this illusion of health, right? So that's going on, is we think we're better than we are, or we think we're worse than we are. So we go to either extreme. The other thing that tends to happen a lot is that then we pick a diet and we go, okay, this diet, this is for me. It's working. I'm going to go all in. And then what's the first category of that diet we typically look for? The desserts. Right? It's like paleo diet comes out, and it's now prolific in the market. And what's the thing that starts to take off around paleo titles? It's the paleo snacks. And then now it's happening with keto. And I guarantee it's going to start happening with carnivore as well. Like if it's already happened with plant-based as well. Like the category, like I've been in the food business now for over 20 years. The snack category has taken over the grocery store. It used to be barely a third of the shelf aisle, a third of it. That's what it used to be. If you combine them all, maybe half a row, whatever. If you go down half an aisle, that's what the snack category used to be. And now it's, I would say 65% of the store, sometimes even more.
I'd agree with that.
Like that to me is insane. And we have to take ownership of that. Like they would not be carrying all those snacks if we weren't buying them. So we are buying them. So clearly we're in a snacky phase of society where we're very snacky. We're kind of, I think, disassociated because we're not really in our bodies. Because if we were in our bodies, and let's just say you could test this with a CGM, for example. So get a CGM and then just spend your day only checking your CGM and only eating when the CGM tells you it's time to eat versus when your head thinks it's time to eat. And I guarantee you'll start to notice a pattern that you're eating at times where your body doesn't actually need the food. So right there, it's like we're caught in this cycle of snacking all the time. And then the other thing is going back to that illusion of health. It's like we think that because this snack is a nutrition bar, that means it's not the same as a candy bar. Is like not accurate. Or we think just because these are protein chips or chicken chips that they're not the same as, the other chips. It's like, yes, it's not exactly the same, but it's keeping you in this very specific comfort zone and it's keeping you from thriving. Let's just be honest.
So if we think about what will actually help us thrive, I would love to dive into the ancestral principles, and some of our listeners might be unfamiliar with it. So I'd love for you to explain how ancestral dietary principles relate to our health and longevity, especially as we age, and how organ meats play a part into this.
Yeah, if you think about it, the body that we're in is Homo sapiens. So that was developed, 300,000 years ago. And of course, it's slightly, changed over that 300,000 years ago, but that's where the body we're in started then. And if you think back and just do research into what was life like then, well, like flavor represented nutrition. So if you were foraging, if you had killed an animal and you were eating that animal, if there was flavor, that meant your body, it was communicating to your body, hey, I'm getting the nutrients I need. And the body would then communicate back when to stop because the flavor and the calories were in alignment. And now fast forward to our current state, we have extreme flavors with 0 calories. So it's literally confusing our body. And this 300,000 plus year developed body doesn't know what to do with that. And so what happens is we just keep eating. We don't know when to stop. Really what we do is we just go through the whole bag or the whole box, whatever it is, because our body can't regulate it. And so when I think about what is ancestral, I really think about flavors that are found in nature, food that is nutrient dense. So it's not food that's been ultra processed and then nutrition has been re-added to it, but it's food that is naturally nutrient dense. And then honestly, and this is the piece that hardly anyone talks about, which is mindful eating. I think that historically, ancestrally, we weren't as distracted. We weren't as chaotic, and we mindfully ate. We ate slow enough. We're more part of the environment versus checking out of our current environment. And it's a process of eating natural flavors found in nature, nutrient-dense foods, and mindful eating. Those 3 things together are ancestral eating, in my judgment. And that was conducive towards our body telling us what it needed and when to stop. And if you think about it, this is not my quote. This is a quote from Bill Schindler, the author of Eat Like a Human. He's a food anthropologist or archaeologist. And he says, we are the only species in the world that looks to someone else to tell us what to eat. And that's already kind of like, woo, yes, that's really true. But here's where it hits even harder. There's over 7 million species. So what the heck happened to us? Like, why are we so disconnected from our own intuitive knowledge of what we need and how far we have gone from just natural sources that we don't even know how to eat? And I think everyone listening can identify whether you're currently in that period or maybe you have been in that period where you genuinely felt confused. What should I be eating right now? And to me, it's about, I don't think we're going to regress back to our, ancestral selves and we're going to be hunting and hunting in the way that we did. I mean, I know there's of course hunters now, but I just mean the majority of us are in a modern world, right? But I think that we can take those 3 things I just identified, look for food that has flavors that are found in nature, so as naturally flavorful as possible. Maybe you're growing your own food, you're allowing it to grow on the vine or on the bush or whatever it is, or in the ground. Allow it to grow so it's naturally flavorful. Pick foods that are nutrient dense, and then eat them mindfully. So choose who you eat them with, choose the environment you do it in, and take enough time while you're doing it. I mean, look at the very healthy places in the world. How long are their lunch times? Their lunch breaks are like an hour to 2 hours. Ours are 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Like my kids are in school right now. I have a third grader and a seventh grader. Both of their lunch times are 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't count the time it takes them to walk from their class to their locker to the cafeteria, right? What are we teaching our kids? What are we teaching ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
And yet the countries like Italy, France, like these countries where they're not as obese as us, they take 2 hours. They take enough time to go home, make their food from scratch, or they bring it from home. Or if they are eating out, it's a more casual affair, you know? So I think we can learn a lot from just stepping outside of our current environment and seeing what's working for other people and looking back and thinking what's changed between our grandparents and us. Don't go so far back that it's like you can't identify, but just look at how did your grandparents live and eat?
Mm-hmm. They did definitely make more of their own food with healthy fats and probably more animal protein, honestly. What about organ meats, though? Will you talk a little bit about why people shy away from them? Why aren't they being eaten now? And then how do you make those specific foods appealing? Because like I know the benefit of them, but I can't stand the taste. And I don't have any like trauma around liver. My folks didn't try to feed it to me. Like I get that ground beef where it's the Ancestral blend and it has liver and heart and all the things in it. And I can smell it like a mile away and it just like turns me. So yeah, talk to us about organ meats.
Yeah, organ meats are going back to Bill Schindler. Like, so he would say that the reasons why, you know, Ash and I can sit and talk right now, or any of us can, you know, respond to each other through communication, verbal communication, through all the amazing tools we've created as humans. It's because three things we came into our existence that had not before, and those are blood, organs, and fat. So before that period where we started eating those three things, which is when we became a predator, we weren't getting that much of those at all. And what comes with those three things is basically like a powerhouse of nutrition. Just a shotgun of nutrition. It's just so incredibly, the vitamins and minerals and these organ meats in our blood and some of the fats are just so high and concentrated. And they're in the bioavailable forms. They're either the cofactors are present, you know, in nature, so they're absorbable because they're cofactored with one another, or it is the type of that mineral or vitamin that is easily absorbable. So your body, not only when you eat it, do you just kind of feel a little bit like imagine when you first had bone broth. Like, I don't know for you, Ashley, but when I did, I just felt my body kind of curl in. And I was like, oh, this is so warming and nurturing. And it had nothing to do with whether it was winter or what season. It just like, I just remember that feeling that came over me. Mm-hmm. And I find that that's true as well with organ meats, that there's just something like it's in the DNA, our human DNA of like, oh, this is what our body was made from or supported the growth of where we are now. And I really think it's because so many of our foods are nutrient deficient. Mm-hmm. I think it's very fascinating. There's something like 92, this is a 2015 percentage that came out from a study, 2015. So now we're almost 10 years later. So I would guarantee that we're higher, I think. So the 2015 study said 92% of Americans are nutrient deficient.
Yeah, I believe that.
I think it's closer to 94 now, personally, maybe even higher. But here's the key to that is we are not calorie deficient. And that is a very important distinction. So these figures are telling us we are nutrient deficient, but if you look at American society, it's an obese society. We're not nutrient deficient because we're not eating enough food. We're nutrient deficient because of the foods we're eating. And organ meats are, when I think about organ meats, I think of them as Mother Nature's multivitamin.
I do too.
When I think about, people talk about planetary focus, like we've got to take care of the planet, and you should be driving electric cars or whatever, all that kind of stuff that people talk about. I'm like, no. You know what would be the most planetary thing you could do is eat whole animal. Because right now we are killing an animal, a cow, and we are only utilizing 50% of that cow. We're mostly using the muscle meat and then some of the bones that are attached to those muscle meats. I went to a Wyoming slaughterhouse, and I've talked to other slaughterhouse people in the past, but I went to one, and I promise you what I'm saying to you is true. They confirmed it. But I said, so what are you doing with the rest of the animal? And they said, we're just throwing it away. And I said, I thought it went to zoos. I thought it went to other industries. He said, sometimes, but not us. We don't have it set up for that. And I was like, oh my gosh. So you're telling me that we're slaughtering this animal, and this industry is built upon not utilizing 50% of that animal. Like, what industry would ever not utilize 50% of its resource?
Yeah.
Right? And so to me, when I talk about eating organ meats, I'm not just talking about liver. I'm not just talking about one part of the animal. I'm talking about we should be eating as much of that animal as possible. So that means one of the best ways to start eating whole animal is to join some kind of meat share or CSA that does animal. Because in that situation, if you buy like a quarter of a cow or a half of a goat or something like that, you're going to get more parts of that animal, you're used to. And here's the thing. I know that can be overwhelming, but I feel like in today's day and age, when someone says, I don't know what to do with this, it's like, you know what? You got to be honest with you. Let's stop the helplessness and let's be honest. You don't have to wait till the person comes to your door and you order the next book of the series. It's like, we have the internet. You can literally say, I got, and then look at what the label says. I got, ossobuco in my order. How do I cook that? What is the best recipe for cooking this piece of animal? And 100+ recipes will pop up. So there's just no excuse for this helplessness of like, I don't know what to do with it, so I'm afraid. It's like, take a breath and just know that you are not only saving the planet when you eat whole animal, but you're saving yourself because you're getting nutrients that you're not getting normally.
What is a way or two ways that people could make liver? How would you make liver?
Well, so one of the things, because I hear you when you said like when I smell it and you have a visceral reaction. So here's one of the things. Most people are overcooking their liver and really all their organs. They're just overcooking them. And when you cook anything, you think about it, when you are cooking even muscle meat, but particularly liver, the smell changes in the room. The nutritional benefits change. They actually lessen. But in the case of liver, it actually gets more pungent. It gets stronger. So if you're someone who's sensitive to liver, guess what's the best way to eat it?
Raw.
Raw. Yeah.
Actually, I want to ask you about that because what I've done, and no one take this advice because it could be crazy, but I'll take liver that's been frozen and I get it from a reputable source, slice it into really thin slices, and then I thaw just like one or two of those slices and I take it like it's a capsule and I just swallow it. And I can't taste it. Is that crazy? Is that really crazy?
No, so many people do that and it's fine. I'm a big fan of eating my food. So I don't like to just swallow it, even though it is small bites. I just believe that we get information from the mastication and from the sensual properties of the food that inform our body of, hey, do you want more or less of this? Because a lot of times, like if you swallow something, you're going to get that feedback, but it's going to be delayed.
True.
And I want to know up front, like, for example, if you're menstruating, you might want more. And if you're not, you might want less. And there will be days like people get nervous because, and this is one of the things that they use as an excuse of why they're not eating organs. Oh, I'm so worried I'll get too much vitamin A. It's like, okay. But here's the thing. If you eat it, your body will never let you get too much. When it's real food, think about salt. If I put salt out, you dip your finger in that salt. The first time you put your finger in your mouth, you might like it. You'll be like, oh, that's pretty good, right? Second time, Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. It's not as good as the first time. Try to do it a third time. It will not taste the same. The fourth time, you will literally start gagging. You'll be like,
Yeah.
get me water quick. You'll viscerally respond. Your body is saying, hey, you're overwhelming me with salt. Stop. Because your body wants to survive. It has a neurolingual response, which is the process of our eating and our senses with our food. That process of mastication, the swallowing, the taste buds in our mouth. There's also taste buds down as it goes down your esophagus into towards your stomach. There's multiple places where there's taste buds, but it's like, it's all communication. And this is how we tap our primal knowledge of what our body wants. Because you can go to any doctor, and yes, if they do blood tests, stool tests, that all helps. I'm a big fan of getting as specific as you can with your health. But even then, the doctor who prescribes the supplements is still guessing. They're like, okay, I know that you're depleted, you have anemia, I know that you need vitamin A, so we're going to start taking this supplement, but we're going to do this amount of dosage, and then we're going to check you in a month to make sure that you're not over under, because you don't know, right? You don't actually know how the body's going to respond. And so it's all kind of guesswork, and it's informed guesswork, but it's still guesswork. But the way that you can tap your own body is all you have to do is eat it. Your body will not let you go beyond. Let's say the liver that you're swallowing right now, if you actually chewed it, your palate would start to shift so that you actually started to accept the flavor. So you would actually start to like it. And then B, your body would tell you, I want more or I want less.
So you're telling me right now I need to chew the raw liver.
Yes.
Is that's the summary?
And if you're struggling with that, then guess what? Here's another option. Okay. Instead of making it pill-sized bites, make it into cubes, like, I don't know, 1 ounce cubes.
Okay.
And then keep it still frozen and stick it in your smoothie if you have a smoothie.
I know. I have tried that too. That's okay. That's second best because I still can taste it.
Okay, then do less. Do less.
Yeah. Okay.
Just lower the amount you add to it. Now, this is the way that I love telling people, because one thing you're doing already is you're already being really smart about how you work with the liver. Because what's overwhelming for people is when the liver is defrosted. When we have a defrosted organ meat, it's like, it's all slimy. It's a different texture than muscle. It's like, it's huge. You're like, what do I do with it? I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, how am I going to finish all this? My family's just going to throw it away. It's wasted money, right? But if you keep it frozen, it's not overwhelming. And so what I tell people to do is every time you're having grated or ground meat, any meat, doesn't matter if it's turkey, chicken, beef, lamb, doesn't matter. Take out that beef liver and just grate a little bit of it into that ground meat and mix it in really well. So it's not like on the outside, but it's really just mixed in very well. And you only need, like, for a pound of beef, I would use like a tablespoon to even 2 tablespoons max. Like, don't go too crazy. And just do a little bit and then put it right back in the freezer, not overwhelming, and you won't taste it.
True. When my kids were little, I would do that for their food, like their finger food. If they were eating a scrambled egg, or if I was doing a meatball or anything, I would grate some liver in there for them.
And do you notice that they have more of a palate for that stuff, or have they lost that?
I didn't do it religiously with my daughter, and she's fussy. The boys will eat whatever, and they like meat and an organ meat flavor. So it probably did have something to do with it.
So, yeah, and that's one way to kind of start shifting the palate is, so let's go back to the 4 flavors. So we have salty, sweet, bitter, sour. There's a 5th called umami. That was discovered in the 90s. And umami is in tons of stuff. Tomatoes have umami, mushrooms. Most of those umami mixes at like Trader Joe's, they're made from mushrooms.
Right.
Well, the other thing that has umami is organ meats. And even muscle meat has umami. So what I do is I use the food the kind of the seasoning I created, which is pluck. So what I do is I took freeze-dried powdered organ meats and I combine them with spices and herbs. And then what I do is I just start introducing the seasoning that has that umami to the foods that my kids are eating. And I'm hearing this countlessly from practitioners who use this tool with their clients. I get constant feedback. They're like, let's say the kid's spectrum, very specific textures, very specific flavors. They're like, just add this as you would a salt. Don't tell your kids what it is. Don't tell them, just let them taste it. Like, let them see if they like it. And most kids do like it. And then what the parents start seeing is the more, all they do is just keep adding this umami seasoning with the organ meats, because now they're getting the nutrition and the umami. And their kid's palate starts to open up, because what's happening is that we're stuck in that salty sweet. The American diet is stuck in salty sweet. The way out of that is you've got to introduce sour, you've got to introduce bitter, and you've got to introduce umami. And those three will start to open the palate up, but you don't have to go all in. Like, you treat it like you would like a pet. Like, if you were changing a pet's food, you wouldn't just give them the new food that they'd throw up or they'd have diarrhea all over the place, right? Like, their systems are so sensitive. So what you would do is you do like 95% of the old food and only 5% of the new food. So like, one way I would add sour into a child's diet is I would get sauerkraut, and I would take this sauerkraut juice, so just a tiny bit, and I would add it. And let's just say your kid is hooked on chicken nuggets and ketchup. Let's just say, right? So I would take a little bit of that.
Or maybe not just your kid, but you too, right?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Good point. Okay. So let's say you're hooked on that. I would take some of the sauerkraut juice, and I would add it to the ketchup and blend it really well so it still looks like ketchup, and you're only using a tiny bit at first, very tiny bit. I'm talking like maybe a couple, like if you're talking about a tablespoon of ketchup, we're talking like an eighth to a fourth of a teaspoon of that kraut juice, tiny bit. And you just mix it in, and you're done for that day. And then the next day, do it again. And all week, do it at that fourth of a teaspoon. But then the next week, increase it. And then the third week, increase it even more. And you can then even start adding like something like pluck or some kind of umami seasoning into that ketchup, just a tiny bit. But you will literally start to not only support that palate towards those new flavors, like easing them into those new flavors, but then you'll watch their palate literally blossom, and they'll start going like, hey, I want to try that. Can I see what that tastes like? You'll literally see them start to be drawn. This idea that it's like this secret potion, this idea that pickiness is like, oh, you have to go to therapy for all these years. It's like, no, it's physical. Like, yes, there's emotions, but the way to get through emotions is a lot of times is through the physical aspect of it, right? Because a lot of times the trauma, it's just like, imagine like a car going through a tunnel. It's just stuck in a tunnel. It's not who you are. You've just identified with it all these years. You've built up story around it. But we just got to kind of like shift that energy. We got to let that trauma flow out, whether, that showed up as in this form of like picky eating. And then we can really kind of attack it through the physical, which is by adding those new flavors and also keeping the food that you're trying to introduce regular, just very tiny amounts, but keep it regular. Because if you think about it, when someone's incarcerated, right, you always hear the first day they go in, the food is horrible. I hate the food, gross, I can't eat. But once they leave that incarceration, they miss the food. And that's because if the things that we do daily, multiple times daily, are the things that our body gets acclimated to and actually starts to get used to. Like, we actually start to build a liking to the things that we do daily.
Yeah, those are great tips. Question, what would be an example of something bitter that we could add?
Well, there are bitter tonics, right? And they have like little droplets. So there's some like citrus tonics that are bitter. Like, there's, of course, winter greens are very bitter. So like, one thing that if your kid or you can get past something green, because I know sometimes green things are scary, but that's just such an absurd thing to say, right? Green things are scary. But I know that that's reality for some people, right? But what you can do is when you're, let's say, making that pesto that's green, instead of using basil or also in inclusion of using basil, add a little bit of something bitter, like add a little arugula or add a little spinach or add some other bitter green to it. And you'll do the exact same thing we were doing with the umami or the sour, is you just slowly start to introduce those flavors to someone's palate.
So my last question is, what kind of tips might you have to support people in their kitchens? Like any cooking tips? For example, I've learned that if I'm making greens, I want to add a bitter, like an acid. I'm sorry, not bitter. We were on the topic, but add an acid because it makes it less bitter, actually. So, like if I cook collard greens or spinach, mustard greens, I'll add some balsamic vinegar or a squeeze of lemon. Do you have any other tips for people as they're getting more acquainted with their kitchen and cooking?
Yeah, fat is your friend. So a lot of times you can really make almost anything more palatable by just adding fat to it. And that could be butter, that could be cheese. I mean, it really does work. Like kids may not eat broccoli straight, but they'll eat it covered in butter or with cheese. That's one thing. Lemon, even lemon zest is extremely, it really does brighten everything. Like, so if you find food is just a little flat, which, you know, can get boring, you know, and you can't underestimate if you're eating the same things over and over, how that might make you feel emotionally and how your emotions around eating the food. Like, are you excited? Or you kind of like, not interested, whatever. It's just fuel. Like that does affect your attraction towards eating. So a little lemon zest, I'll just a planer, like one of those zester plain graters, and I'll just zest a little of the lemon on there. This is kind of just a fun one, is like, just if you're wanting to pique people's appetites or make people think that you're a better chef than you really are, just start sauteing onions on your stovetop, onions and garlic. The aromatics of them both, when people walk into the house, into the kitchen, you'll hear a lot like, oh, what are you making? That smells so good. And all you're doing is just sauteing onion. It's really interesting. But I find the more that I kind of am mindful of that balance between, as you said, the acid and the salt, that's one way of kind of like finding balance and finding flavor. The other is finding natural ways to bring out sweetness. So what happens in a restaurant when someone is making, let's say, a dressing, they might go too far with the salt, they might go too far with the bitter. And so how they get out of that is just adding sugar. Yeah. That's why you're never going to be healthy eating out, because based on the ingredients they use, they're cutting costs, they're using bad oils, but also there's just a lot of sugar and everything. So at home, what you can do is you could add a date. So it's a real food that's just been dried, right? You can add, you can take onions and you can actually saute them till they're, slightly caramelized, and add those to the dressing or the sauce. You can take carrot. You can actually cook the carrot so it's sweeter, because anytime you cook something, you're bringing out the natural sweetness in it. And then you could add those cooked carrots to the blended dressing. So there's lots of ways to use actual food, bring out the natural sweetness of that food, and then use that to kind of balance the recipe versus, just adding sugar.
I've heard that sometimes salt can bring out sweetness. Like if you have a fruit tea that doesn't have any sugar added to it and you add just a dash of salt, it enhances the sweetness of it. Is that true?
It's not necessarily that it's bringing out the sweetness, but sometimes it's offsetting the sweetness. So it's like you can almost taste it better. If you think about it, like if you have ice cream, right, and it's cold, you don't taste how sweet it is. But if you let that ice cream get warm, it's so sweet. So it's always been as sweet as you're tasting it when it's warm, but the temperature is offsetting how your body receives it. And the same thing goes with salt as well. Like it can brighten things, but it can also go too much and, make them not palatable.
Question about cooking steaks. If you take them out, do you want them to be at room temperature, and then should you salt them right away? Like, does that change anything about the cooking process?
Well, salt pulls out moisture, right? So when people talk about brining something, they're allowing it to sit in that salt long enough where the moisture gets pulled out and then reabsorbed. If you're just pulling something out and you're salting it, I was always taught when I was a young kid by my neighbor who was a big foodie. He always said you just salt the fat, when you're right before you're going to cook it. You don't actually salt the muscle, because the muscle you're going to pull moisture out of the muscle if you salt it. So I was always told to salt the fat. So for example, when I use pluck, which is the seasoning I talked about earlier that I make, a lot of people are putting it on before they cook. And I'm like, well, why would you do that? Because if you put any seasoning on food, except maybe salt, but But even with salt, you're denaturing it. But heat denatures the vitamins and minerals and things, right? If you put a seasoning on the outside of that steak and then you put it in your pan or on that grill, what color does it get? It gets black. And that's carcinogenic. Like that's not healthy for you. So how I like to do it is I just salt the fat, and then what I do is I just lightly cook it. I've learned to actually like beef that's, not well done, but that's actually more rare to medium rare. And then what I do is I add the seasoning after it's been cooked. And one of the best ways to add the seasoning of anything is you put it with some fat. So like compounded butter, for example. So you take the seasoning that you love, add it to some butter, and then just put a slab of that butter with the seasoning on it on top of the steak. And holy moly, it's like the butter just starts to melt and all the seasonings kind of just spread along that entire piece of meat. And it's so good because none of the seasonings are burned. So they're not bitter or charred. And you're getting just optimal flavor. And there's still lots of moisture because you didn't pull it all out with the salt.
That's great. You're making me hungry. Where can people learn more about Pluck and try it out?
Absolutely. So eatpluck.com is our website. You can also find us on Amazon. We have 4 SKUs. So we have 3 that are what I call seasonings. They have 5 organs: liver, heart, kidney, spleen, and pancreas, and Redmond salt, and then spices and herbs. Okay. They're all slightly different, and they all, I think, are delicious because I'm a chef.
They're
and
great.
I made them. Like you've had them, right? It's like,
yeah, I love them.
It's like I designed them to be flavorful. And here's one tip about seasonings. What is the first ingredient of most seasonings?
Sugar.
Sometimes what even
Salt.
more so for a seasoning?
Salt, I would say.
Exactly, because salt's cheap. So the way that they make their money and they make that seasoning so cheap is because it's salt, mostly salt with some seasoning. Pluck is seasoning with some salt. Salt is like the 3rd or 4th ingredient. So it's a totally different experience than most seasonings, not only because of the organ meats, but because it's designed for flavor. And then we have a 4th one that's just pure. It's just the organ meats. So that's for people like yourself who are like, hey, I don't like the taste of organs, but I do want to get them in my diet. And I want to be able to add it to a smoothie sometimes, or ground meat another time, or to a dressing, or, I just want it to be very flexible. And that pure is really flexible. It's like it can go sweet or savory, and a little goes a long way. Like a teaspoon of pure is equal to 2 ounces of organs. That's how concentrated the organs are. Yeah.
Wow.
It's crazy. Like
I'll have to try that one.
I'm always telling people, when you take 100% organ meat and you freeze dry it, you're left with like 19 to 20%. So you're left with an extremely concentrated amount of organ meats. And you don't need much. Little goes a long way. And I'm a big fan of little daily movements are what we want in our health journey, because that's more sustainable than extremes.
It's true.
But yeah, like I said, Amazon or on our website, eatpluck.com. And then you can find us on socials at eatpluck. And then I am Chef James Berry.
Thank you so much, Chef James. It was great chatting with you. All right, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed today's episode, that you got a lot of action steps you can take. If you are a picky eater, I hope that this opened up some different avenues for you to try new things, new foods, and just get creative with what you are fueling your body with. All right, you guys, if you have any questions on anything and you are watching this on YouTube, please drop your comments in the comment section and I'll be sure to answer. If you are listening to this on a podcast platform, please leave your review. Your feedback really does matter. And remember, you got to step up to make the change. Lead with your heart, train your mind, and do not negotiate with your body. I'll see you next time.